Hey, welcome to Tape, powered by Ram Motor Trend's back-to-back winner of Truck of the Year. I'm Ryan Dixon. I'm a writer at Sportsnet.ca. Joining me on the other line, as always, Sportsnet's NHL editor, Rory Boylan. Rory, you want to do 5 extra segments just for the hell of it?
I feel like we have to keep on that storyline. If they can do it and they can play hockey doing it for that long, I think we can podcast for an
We can
extra
from now.
5 segments.
Well, yeah, it's 11 a.m. right now on Wednesday. Can we hold this up till like dinner time? Well, we'll see. We will do blow by blow of every team. We're gonna do close to that, anyways. We're gonna cover a lot in this pod. We are going to talk about the NHL playoffs, the actual playoffs. They are here. You and I are going to pick our final 4, our final 2, a cup winner. We're going to talk about the 3 Canadian teams that have made it through to the main draw: Montreal, Calgary, and Vancouver. We're also going to talk about the New York Rangers winning the first overall pick in the 2020 Draft Lottery. The Jets, Leafs, and Oilers all ousted in the qualifying round. We're going to take a look at those teams, not so much relive what happened in their series, so much as cast forward a little bit. And I think we have to talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins, because that's a team that has now won one playoff game the past 2 years. I mean, Sidney Crosby himself saying it. It's, the shadows are getting a little long out there a bit as he turns 33, Malkin 34. So we've got to address what is next for one of the most prominent teams of the past 15 years in the NHL. But let's start with one of the more prominent teams for decades and decades in the NHL, the original 6 New York Rangers. 1 year after getting some lottery luck and moving up to pick number 2, boom, the Rangers land the first overall pick. It will be Alexis Lafreniere. You can put it on the board. They are now really strong on the wings with Artemi Panarin, with Cabo Caco, and with Lafreniere. I don't know. Have we seen a reboot, a retool go as well as the Rangers has the past 2 or 3 years?
I mean, no, not how quickly they were able to do it. It was just 2 years ago that they sent out that famous letter to their fans just before the trade deadline. We're just kind of bracing them for, okay, we're going to start selling now. We're going to start taking a step back and rebuild this thing a little bit. And it didn't take very long. Now you look at the Rangers with Lafreniere, and I mean, even without him, they were trending in a really positive direction. A top 5 offensive team this year. They found the goalie who is going to replace Lundqvist arrived and looked fantastic. They're talking about moving ahead with 2 goalies next year, so that's going to be an interesting storyline to follow, is what they do with Lundqvist. But at this year's trade deadline, instead of just always selling and selling and selling, they were able to re-sign Chris Kreider and keep him there. And now you look at their left wing depth. I mean, wing depth is great, but left wing depth, you got Lafreniere, Panarin, and Kreider. That's incredible depth on that side of things. And then you've got just a ton of exciting young guys. I mean, we didn't see a lot from Capo Caco this year, the second overall pick in last year's draft, but I'm definitely not going to sit here and say he's a bust. I would expect him to just get better as we go along. On defense, Adam Fox had over 40 points this year, and in some years he might have gotten a Calder finalist nod, but there were a lot of really good candidates for that this year, so we flew a little bit under the radar. You wonder, the only question maybe about going forward is, do they end up in a spot kind of like the Maple Leafs, where they've got all of this talent up front and a goalie they can count on, but that defense is going to need a little bit of work? I mean, you've got Fox, but you wonder about Tony DeAngelo. He's an RFA this year, and he's a pretty big liability on defense. He brings some offense to his game, but Mark Stahl's getting older. He's 33. And then you've got some depth there, like Brennan Smith is fine, but you don't have a lot of pop there.
They need their McDonough-Girardi pairing from 2013 back.
They need something like that, exactly. And that's kind of what they're going to need to try and find this offseason. And that's really the last thing that is missing from feeling really, really good about this team going into next season. But regardless of that, regardless if they are able to fix all of these holes by next year, you can just see it very quickly coming together now for the Rangers. And it was nice that out of all the chaos that could have happened from this lottery with all the upsets and the possibility of Toronto, Edmonton, or Pittsburgh getting the first overall pick, it was nice that it was a team that actually could have used that pick and probably would have been in the lottery anyway in a normal season, instead of instead of some crazy result. You get a team that really could use that first overall pick.
A few things. I did kind of want Pittsburgh to win it, to be honest with you. We're going to get there later. I wonder too, like, the Rangers are always hit with that, oh, it's good for the league when a star goes there kind of thing. That makes everyone else want to retch. The other thing too is, like, if they're going to start getting lottery luck, like, they're kind of the luckiest team in the league already, right? Like, they probably benefit more than any other team, with the exception of maybe like a Tampa or San Jose, like well-run, warm weather, perhaps no tax places. The Rangers benefit the most just by virtue of the fact of being the Rangers, right? Like, Artemi Panarin was going to the Big Apple. Adam Fox was able to dictate the circumstances to allow him to sign with the New York Rangers, right? Like, they are a team that, that's just all. I mean, even remember Kevin Shattenkirk. You forget that, like, he took a haircut to go there, like, that team is always front and center and the top choice of so many people for any number of reasons. But I mean, it's New York. It's just such an awesome place to live and play. So now if they start getting lottery luck to go along with that, there's going to be some teams in the league that are going to be grinding their teeth a lot.
Yeah, what's going to be interesting here is it's just, okay, you've got a lot of good young players. You've got some veteran guys that are really playing well too. Zibanejad's another guy we got to mention here. So
you mean the goals per game leader in the NHL last year?
Exactly. So they're rising, obviously, but it's like, man, look at that Metropolitan Division, and like, who are they displacing here? Like, Pittsburgh. Okay, I mean, we'll talk about them here, and maybe there's some kind of room where they're going to possibly start declining to some degree here. But like, Washington doesn't really look like they're going away anywhere soon. I mean, Alex Ovechkin's got a contract that's coming up, and that could be really interesting, but they just seem like they have a really strong base. They've got goaltending questions, but I don't think they're going to fall off the face of the earth. Carolina looks like a team that's rising, getting better, as now their offensive stars are starting to hit their stride. Philadelphia, really hard to get a handle on them, because you look at them and you say, wow, they're really deep. They have their goalie. They were one of the best teams in the NHL in the last few weeks leading up to the pause, and looked great in the round robin. But I mean, they're just like in the playoffs one year and out the next, and they're all over the place. So it's like, what is really going to stick with that team? But you've got some really strong established teams in that Metropolitan Division. So it's not obvious where the Rangers are going to rise above and how quickly that's going to happen.
And hey, man, look across the river. I know things aren't going well right now, but the Devils have the top pick in 2017 and 19. Oh, and PS, they're both centers. That's probably going to get on track before too long. And I don't think you mentioned Columbus, which is proving to be as tough out as there is in the NHL. So yeah, a lot of work. Don't put the first cup in now. Almost, we're going to be chanting 1994 soon. It's been so long since the Rangers won. But yeah, definitely on the right track. Speaking of on the right track, I mean, probably people would have been saying that of the Edmonton Oilers, of the Toronto Maple Leafs, of the Winnipeg Jets, definitely at different points in the past few years. All three of those teams lost qualifying round best-of-5 series. We're going to talk about them all, but I want to start with this. If you were going to put your arm around one frightened fan base right now and say, take a deep breath, calm down, it's going to be all right, which one of those three are you trying to reassure?
I think it's got to be Toronto, honestly. They have the most skill. I mean, you could say Winnipeg because, all right, this year, I just don't think that Winnipeg Jets fans are so devastated, because there were so many hurdles this year, and the way it ended with the injuries to Laine and Scheifele too being such huge factors. If they had won that series, it would have been just like house money, right? Like found money. It would have been unexpected, and you would have taken it, and you probably would have expected them to lose in that next round. They need to find something to improve that defense, but like there are outs there. There are reasons that you could say, okay, that's fine with this team on to the next year. But with Toronto, I mean, you had cup aspirations. You had at least the expectation that you would finally get out of that first series and give Tampa Bay a run for their money. Everybody was wanting Toronto to get that Tampa Bay matchup over the last couple of years, probably instead of Boston, and it was almost there this year. But they're the team that's just, you look at and you say, they have the most skill, right? And they have the guys that are under contract for a long time. Do they have problems? Absolutely. You need to find a way to, it's easy to say, but you need to get a little tougher. You need to find a little bit more of that edge. You need to buy into defense a little bit more than they had been. And I think they started to show it even. Like Austin Matthews was playing well at both ends of the ice and was playing pretty physically, more than we're used to, I think, in that Columbus series. So it wasn't all bad even. And you got to point to teams like the Washington Capitals, and I would even say the San Jose Sharks, that for years were stacked and just couldn't get over that hurdle and were the best teams that weren't winning Stanley Cups. Washington finally did it and won a Stanley Cup after years and years of trying different things. One of them finally worked. San Jose never did, but they did get to a Stanley Cup final, and they were pushing to the conference finals a couple of times. And at that point, it's like, let the chips fall where they may, right? Like you get to the conference final and a bad bounce could win you or lose you a series, whatever it is. Toronto's looking for that kind of a breakthrough. And I just think that if you make the minor adjustments around the stars on this team, instead of looking at it and saying, we've got to trade Nylander or Marner, or I don't understand about Tavares.
Are you staying on the no trade Marner, no trade Nylander? You've long been I don't know why they would trade Willie Nylander guy.
Yeah, I think I am. This summer is going to be interesting in that who knows what the market is going to look like. Everybody's going to be tight to the cap. You're probably going to have a number of teams that are going to be looking to do some things, but how possible is it really with everybody so tight? If the right deal came along for either one of them, I think now is the time where you explore it, but it would really have to absolutely blow me away. And I don't think that deal's there. So I would run it back again and try and just do what you can to upgrade the second defense pair, or like add another Muzzin type of guy, a defensively responsible guy, and a little bit more sandpaper up onto the third and fourth lines as well. Although the fourth line was good for the Leafs, but you need, how long is that going to last? I think it's those little kind of things. Those are attainable upgrades for this team in the offseason. I don't think they need to blow it up that much. No.
The analogy I would make with trading Nylander or Marner, which I, for the record, am not against, but here's the issue. It's like going out and trying to buy a house in a hot market, right? Like you can't just walk into every house on the block, find your dream house, negotiate the price and say, okay, done. Here we go. We're moving into our new house. You are at the mercy of what's available. Yes. And bidding wars all over the place, right? So if you could go out and for sure get precisely what Mitch Marner is worth in the form of a defenseman coming back, yeah, you probably would do that.
Sure.
But who knows who's going to be available, right? And I do think they have to be ready with their deposit and ready to go at a moment's notice if all of a sudden a 22 to 26-year-old right shot guy all of a sudden falls out of favor for whatever reason with his team and can be had for a big price. But like you said, who knows? Chances are that's not going to happen. That's how you end up with Tyson Barrie, because you're saying, well, it's time to move on from Kadri. We need a defenseman. You run the numbers and it's like, well, this is realistically probably the best fit. And you make the trade, and 12 months later, or I guess more, people are saying it was a complete disaster, and you can't afford to have a disaster if you trade Nylander or Marner. So yep. I'm sure that is being heavily considered, but it really comes down to not so much the Leafs' willingness to part with those players. Of course they would part with them if the return was right. It's just where's the fit?
Exactly. Like, who is that 22 to 26-year-old defenseman that's going to be out there? And I'm not even convinced that guy would be enough for a 1-for-1 for Marner. I still think you need to add on to that, because Marner is just such a special player. It's not just the offense that pops off the page at you. He's their best penalty killer. He's one of the better penalty killers in the entire league. So, I wouldn't just be like, oh, here's this in his prime defenseman with a nice contract. I'll flip him for Marner. I don't think that's enough. I think you'd want some other stuff around that, whether it's futures or more likely, another player or two that's going to help you correct what you need to correct on this team. And so that trade is not obvious. And we're not talking about, the Los Angeles Kings make Drew Doughty available. You trade Marner for Doughty. I wouldn't do that. I wonder how many people would do that.
I would still think about it, Rory. I'm a sucker, and that's the one I've looked at for a long time. I mean, it's one of those things that's situational, though, that yes, Marner's true value is worth more, obviously, than a 30-plus Drew Doughty. But given how desperately the Leafs need that player, and I know, people take shots at Drew Doughty for not being the fittest guy in the league and all that. I think if you put that guy in a situation where the juices are flowing and he's trying to win a cup with the Toronto Maple Leafs, the way he moves, how smart he is, he could be one of those guys who's a very, very good player for 4 more years and super useful for 3 more after that.
It's the $11 million.
It's a big hit. You'd have to work something else there. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And again, he's got a no move clause. He has to agree to all
this. Yeah, he'd have to be all in.
This is so pie in the sky and unlikely to happen. But that's the one that you point to and is the most interesting debate on this, I think, is because you're trying to figure out what kind of defenseman would you find acceptable moving Marner for. And if you're not okay with a Norris level guy like Doughty in his 30s making $11 million a year for Marner, it's so hard to find another guy that fits that bill, right? That you're for sure going to feel good about. I would love to have Drew Doughty on the team. I think he'd be a great fit and he makes anybody better. I'm not knocking the player. It's just where they are in their careers and what they're making on their salary cap hits. That makes it a little bit harder to swallow for me. I keep coming back to these other teams that are examples of losing and losing and losing and finally getting over the hump. And I just feel better that this core of 4 forwards plus Morgan Riley, I just feel better about those guys eventually breaking through here in the next couple of years than I would doing something drastic like trading one of those guys for God knows what.
Well, we know this. The comparisons are moving off the Taves, Kane, Hawks, the Malkin, Crosby, 2009 Penguins teams that got all the way within 3 or 4 years to, like you said, the Capitals, the Sharks. So we'll see what happens there. So that's the Leafs. I agree with you with the Jets. It does. I mean, there's still a lot to like there, especially up front. We'll see if Vinny Hanola and Dylan Sandberg can come in and Josh Morrissey keeps getting better. Pionk. There's still some hope that can be a real good team soon. I want to talk about the Oilers, though, because I really feel like had they played 82 games and made the playoffs, this would have been viewed as a very successful year, no matter what. Barring them getting swept and looking like clowns in the first round of a best of 7, we would have been like, okay, we can quiet the when's McDavid going to want out talk. Yeah. We can talk about Yamamoto and Ethan Bear and how things are coming together under Holland. And yeah, they still have some goaltending issues, but instead they end up going into this qualifying round as the top seed in the West. They lose to the lowest seed in 4 games. And now all of a sudden I feel like that foul taste is kind of back.
Yeah. I mean, your comparison there off the top of if they got to the playoffs, it would have been fine unless they got embarrassed in that first round. That's what this is. They lose to a team that had 0 chance of making it to the playoffs and had all these designs on winning a lottery. They were trade deadline sellers.
Yeah.
Chicago gave up Eric Gustafson to Calgary and Robin Lehner to Vegas, who they're now playing in the first round of the playoffs. So that's going to leave a bad taste in your mouth. For me, it just so much of this is goaltending. They've got to find a better goalie, and maybe this is the offseason to do it because there's a number of guys who are going to be available in free agency, maybe a couple of more in trade. Can they find it? I don't think you can run back Koskinen and Smith again. I mean, chances are one of them gets hot during the regular season for a stretch, and then you can go to the other guy, and it worked fine for that. But in a playoff series, there's no room for error, and you need you need more of one guy that you can count on or feel better about, even if it's still a tandem situation. You need somebody that you can feel better about than I think Oilers fans did about either of these guys this year. But again, you come away and you look at it and you say, was this really the year Edmonton was going to break through and go to a conference final or something like that? And I think the answer is no. This is the first year of Ken Holland and Dave Tippett together. Both are really respected and have had a lot of success in other places. I think some of the moves that Holland made, like around the edges this year, were positive. But his approach is always going to be kind of the long term, not trying to fix this thing in 1 or even 2 seasons. It's bringing in the pieces that are going to make it last. And, that's probably what he'll try and accomplish again this summer. They're not going to go out and make some big trade or big free agent signing outside of goaltending, maybe, that is going to try and fix this thing overnight. It's going to be a gradual build. And I just think that's the reality here. So that's why, you come away, it's definitely disappointing. It's definitely a bad taste in your mouth. And there's going to be questions that are going to need answering. But at the end of the day, it's like, this was never really going to be Edmonton's year anyway. Let's see how they can come back next season. I know that's not the thing that Oilers fans maybe want to hear right now. But that's kind of the reality, is they're still building towards better days, and maybe that they can take something out of this loss against Taves and Kane and guys that have won the cup before, and learn something and be better defensively next year. And that really is the best thing that could come out of this for the Oilers.
All right. I'm ending block 1 by maybe blowing your mind. I don't know. We'll see. But I'm looking at the Pittsburgh Penguins. I'm looking at Sidney Crosby acknowledging the reality of the situation where he has it in his career. I mean, granted, please don't go writing his obituary just yet.
No.
I'm listening to Jim Rutherford say changes have to be made. Now, I don't think anyone expects him to go, you can forget the trade Malkin. I mean, I think that is just not, it probably just doesn't make sense, full stop. Certainly not trading Crosby or Letang. This morning, they cleaned house behind the bench with the exception of head coach Mike Sullivan, who took some heat. This is 2 series in a row now where the Penguins have managed just 1 win. They were swept in 2019 by the Islanders. They lost 3-1 in the best of 5 to Montreal. I mean, played well enough to win, obviously, at a lot of times, but didn't. I'm just looking at this as a team that clearly has one last phase to go, might need one last jolt. And Mike Sullivan was the jolt last time when he replaced Dan Bylsma. And I can't help but wonder if there's a 2-time Olympic coach who has a little history with Sidney Crosby, who's probably looking for a little redemptive final chapter of his own, who's probably learned from some mistakes. I'm just saying, if the Penguins start flat next year, could you see the return of Mike Babcock coaching 87 in Pittsburgh as the all right, we're going to do one last thing here to try and in the final window, try and win one more cup in the next, 1 to 4 years. Is that something you think they'd ever entertain?
I mean, why not, right? You're not going to bring in someone who's never coached in the NHL before.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine them bringing in the next 36-year-old coach.
For sure. Yeah, you're not going to bring someone up from the AHL to coach this team, I don't think. If you're going to be replacing Sullivan, you're going to do it with a guy who knows how to push those right buttons and who is familiar with some of these players too. And that's Babcock. That's Babcock up and down. That's a really interesting thought. Now, Sullivan wasn't let go today. I wouldn't expect that to happen in the offseason. But sure, if you get off to a so-so start, the problem is they weren't a so-so team in the regular season this year, right? They were 7th best in the entire league. So you had no reason going into the playoffs to think, maybe Sullivan should have been let go last month or something because they're kind of backing in here. They were really, really good and not showing any signs of that. But obviously, there was no urgency, especially in that game 4 against Montreal. Just zero pushback from the Penguins, which is so strange to see.
Last
thing
you'd expect, yeah,
exactly. So, maybe it is a kick in the butt that they'll need, and that's a really interesting thought there. And he's the exact type of coach that I think that you'd want to replace Sullivan with if you decided that you needed to go that road.
All right, stay tuned. That's maybe a conversation for next winter. We'll see how things roll out. We've got more immediate concerns, though. We've got summer playoff hockey to talk about. Rory and I are going to give you some Stanley Cup picks, plus talk about Calgary, Montreal, and Vancouver, the Canadian teams still plugging in the 2020 Stanley Cup playoffs. Stick around. Lots more to come on Tape to Tape. Hey, welcome back to Tape to Tape. Don't forget to sign up for the Sportsnet Fantasy Hockey Pool presented by RAM. Go to sportsnet.ca/RAM. Over $50,000 in cash prizes. Also, the grand prize, you have a chance to win a 2020 RAM 15 or 2500. So again, go to sportsnet.ca/RAM. Get your fantasy on. If you have any faith in what I believe, and you probably shouldn't based on my qualifier predictions, here's what teams you should be investing in. Here we go, Rory. Final four. Okay. I got Tampa, who won the Marathon 5 OT opener against Columbus. I'm sticking with them, even with Stamkos being out for we don't know how long, and Hedman, who knows, but it was great to see him play. I got Tampa, Carolina, who are playing right now, game one against Boston. And I have to say, I didn't check the score at the break, so they could be down 4-0. I don't even know, but I'm going Tampa, Carolina. My West pick originally was the Nashville Predators. So I have picked a team that did not make the playoffs to make the final. So I have to regroup here, and I'm going to go with Vegas, and I'm going pretty chalk here. I guess I'm going to go with Vegas and Colorado. I'm going Knights, Bolts in the final. And as I've said for years, I'm just picking Tampa Bay year after year. So I'm picking Tampa over Vegas. Tampa, Carolina, Vegas, Colorado, Final Four. Now comes the point in the show where the guy who has picked a Stanley Cup winner that has been swept, not beat, but swept in the first round. This is unbelievable. 3 years in a row. Chicago, I had to go back and look because I was like, who is he picking?
Yeah.
Chicago 2017, swept by Nashville. Anaheim Ducks 2018, swept by San Jose. Yeah. And, of course, Tampa Bay Lightning 2019, swept by the Blue Jackets. So what have you got for us this year?
Like, those weren't crazy picks. They were favored teams.
They certainly weren't picks to lose in 4 games in the first round. I'll tell you that.
So who am I cursing this year, I guess? It's not going to do well for your bracket if that trend continues either, Ryan. I actually don't like how close we are here on our Final Four. I have Tampa Bay and Philadelphia in the East final, Vegas and Colorado in the West. I mean, that would be an amazing series, I think, Vegas and Colorado. Yeah. I would really, really love to see that. And then Tampa, Vegas in the final, just like you, with Tampa winning it. And that would be just an incredible fast series as well. But this was a really hard bracket to fill out this year for obviously a variety of reasons, but especially coming out of that qualifying round where a lot of the tough defensive teams were winning. And so I found myself really struggling with a couple of picks. Like, I did pick Boston over Carolina in the first round, but in 7 games, like, I could see Carolina really breaking through, and I like your pick of them going to the conference final, because I had this feeling like, maybe I should do something like that with Carolina. But just like I said last episode, like, I really have a hard time buying into their goalies. And I also came really close to picking Calgary over Vegas in that second round. I just get a feeling that Calgary's got all of this. Like, they've got the offense, they've got the secondary scoring on that second line too. But they are so deep on the blue line, and they do have that sandpaper that's going to frustrate a lot of teams. Cam Talbot's been playing well in net too. I almost picked them. I kind of overthought myself, and maybe it was like, I can't keep this trend of picking losing teams going for 4 straight years, so I'll just pick the teams that I feel like can't lose. But I get a feeling like this might be a path for Calgary. Like, Dallas just doesn't score enough. So I love that first round matchup. And then after that, it's like, are they just going to be hard on a team like Vegas? And that might be a sneaky team to make it all the way through this year.
So, all right, let's pivot then. We both have Tampa over Vegas for the Cup. I would love to see that happen for the Bolts. They've been such an exemplary organization for so long. God, when Hedman pivoted and it looked like put himself out for the next 2 months with an ankle injury.
Oh, yeah.
Thank goodness that hasn't been the case. Touch wood. That would have just been too much to bear, I think. But just a stellar organization that talk about like just keep running it back. One of these years you have to feel like they're going to break through. But we'll jump into the Canadian team talk with Calgary because I did hover on them, and I have to say I don't think I voiced this yet. I like the reseeding. I will acknowledge that the rigid divisional bracket relative to what I thought it was going to be like when they first introduced it in 13-14, it has worked out better than I thought. I thought I was really going to dislike it. I haven't really disliked it, but now that we have this weird one-off, I do kind of like the fun of reseeding, and I do think that's the way the matchups should work. And I looked at that. I guess it would be 1-6 Calgary. 1-6? Yeah, Calgary, yep. Vegas in the second round. We're saying this as Calgary is up a game on Dallas. Montreal and Vancouver will probably have one game in the books by the time most people hear this, but Calgary has already shown something. Milan Lucic is your early Conn Smythe winner, just like everyone predicted. Dylan Dubé looks awesome on that third line as well. It's easy to get ahead of yourself, but there is a bit of an 0-4 feel to the team that, the one that went with Mika Kiprusov and Jerome McGinley and Craig Conroy and a, really, really, really hard, feisty group. And that's funny because this is a team that was fast becoming, the head of the overachieving class. And I mean, we talked to Eric Francis last week and asked him, what would it take? This was before they'd put Winnipeg out. What would it take for Calgary to really reassess what they had? Because it felt like they were teetering on the verge of not a blow up, but hard decisions. And man, if they get past Dallas and get into the second round, and who knows, it feels like anything's in play. All of a sudden we're starting to view this team in a bit of a different light.
Yeah. And not only is it the on ice stuff that they have, but kind of those other factors that you talk about that maybe winning teams need. Did they lose before they won? Yeah. They got blown up by Colorado last year in a huge 8-1 upset. Did they deal with adversity? They dealt with a ton of adversity this year around the whole Bill Peters resignation fallout in November. And then they had, they had an interim coach who's turned out to be doing a fantastic job of keeping that room together. And a few of the players have talked about how terrific he was in just kind of keeping everything going. Like after that episode, they didn't take like a massive dive, right? Like they kept it going. They were a good road team this year too. And it's all come together as the season has gone on for them. So it's all that stuff around the team as well that you traditionally think teams need to have before they win. So there's nothing that you can look at for Calgary and say, well, they don't have this or they don't have that yet. They're not perfect everywhere, but no team is. It's the age of parity. But Calgary just seems to be hitting all the right notes right now. And it's just a matter, I feel very confident that they can get by Dallas. It's just a matter of, can they get past the teams that could outskill them, outscore them, the Vegases, the Colorados of the world? Can they get by those teams, like the Tampa Bays of the West, that kind of thing? I think they probably can.
Yeah. I mean, the defense is good enough. Talbot's been great, and they got three lines going. If Lucic and Dylan Dubé are going to rock it on the third line, I mean,
what a game changer. And Sam Bennett's there too. Sam Bennett is a playoff player. Like he might take a bad penalty, and that's the thing, but he'll draw a lot and he'll rough you up. And he was their leading scorer in that 5-game upset last year. So he'll bring a little bit too.
Things all of a sudden looking pretty good for the Flames. What about the other two teams? I mean, like you said, we're in the age of parity. I think both have a crack. I mean, especially Vancouver playing the defending Stanley Cup champion St. Louis Blues. If nothing else, this is going to be a really good up-close look at a championship caliber team for this young team that has so much going for it. And the Canadians, the 24th team in the 24-team tournament, here they are. And I guess we'll start there. There was a lot of talk about the best case scenario for this team losing to Pittsburgh and getting Lafreniere. Yes, that would have been best case. However, if you want to feel good about what's gone on, if you're a Montreal fan, you've got to look at a few things. Number one, there was only a 12% chance you're going to get Lafreniere, so it was probably a little pie in the sky. But the other thing is they're being driven by the performance of some key future players, I guess now and in the future, Nick Suzuki and Jesperi Kotkaniemi. And oh, by the way, at the other end of the spectrum, there was all kinds of questions around Carey Price and his more than pedestrian advanced stats the last few years. Lots of analytic-minded people saying Price doesn't deserve to be in the conversation as being one of the best goalies in the league right now. And he came out and was, the Ted Lindsay Hart Trophy Carey Price. I think you have to say that's reassuring to say you saw the guy who's making $10 million a year for the next 6 years playing that way. So there's that, but mostly I really do think it's about seeing the growth of Kotkaniemi and Suzuki, and now knowing they're going to run up against Sean Couturier and that great Philly D. And even, assuming they do go out in 5 or 6 games to Philly, that's going to be a real eye opener for those guys.
Yeah, I picked Philly in this series, but I don't think it's the craziest thing to suggest that maybe Montreal can pull off this upset too. I wanted to talk myself into it, and I almost did. Montreal's just like, they were one of the better puck possession teams this year, one of the better Corsi teams. They generate a lot of shots versus what they give up at 5-on-5. They got past Pittsburgh without Thomas Tatar, Brendan Gallagher, Jonathan Drouin, Max Domi doing anything really. I think they combined for 1 or 2 points. They've got it, like Gallagher especially. He's going to start scoring, I would think. Like, those guys are going to bring more in this series. I just have to believe. And then if, like you said, if Carey Price, like if there's one thing we've learned from this, I think it's that Montreal has to limit Carey Price to like 50 starts next year or something. Because if this is what he's going to get you when he's rested, you need to be thinking about that more in the regular season than they have been, and lighten his workload. But they also, in the regular season, like, they had a lot of games that they lost by 1 goal or 2 goals with an empty netter. And those could go either way, right? And if they did, Montreal might have been closer to that playoff race, and maybe we'd just be talking about them a little bit differently. Like, I don't know if they have the depth to pull off this upset, which is why I ultimately went with Philadelphia. And it's also totally possible that Carter Hart matches Carey Price save for save in this series, right? Like, he's that kind of a goalie. But it's just like, things might fall their way here if their best offensive players are just able to generate more. That might be the key to winning this series, and that's not such a crazy thing to think that could happen. After that, I don't know. We'll see. But if the kids can keep going and the veterans can turn it up a little bit, Montreal just might be a really tough out for the Philadelphia Flyers here. And so I think, win or lose, Habs fans leave this season just with all sorts of optimism. You're still going to have a pretty good draft pick. If
you're
you
still picking in the middle of the
series.
first round. Yeah,
sure. And they've been drafting pretty well. So, you feel pretty confident that you'll end up with a good player there. And they still have guys coming too. And we've talked about center depth is not such a weakness for this team anymore. There are more players. You got Romanov that's going to be coming onto that blue line next year. I mean, it's just going to keep trending up for this team, and maybe it breathes a little bit more life into, or optimism into, Shea Weber and Carey Price in the next couple of years too, who maybe you were a little bit worried about before all of this. So I think it's all great for Habs fans right now, Ryan. Like, it's gravy. You have to be feeling so good and confident about what comes next. And again, I don't think it's crazy to think that they might be able to win another series.
I assume you would say all that about Vancouver as well. And obviously even with a higher, more immediate ceiling, given Pettersson, Besser, Quinn Hughes, and Markstrom not being lights out in round 1 and probably getting back to his usual self in round 2.
Yeah, they're a little further along than Montreal for sure.
They got their stars.
They've got their stars. That's a tough matchup against the St. Louis Blues, though. And this is also really hard to gauge between St. Louis and Boston, because they were 0-3 in that round robin and did not look good. Boston especially did not look good, but St. Louis was just not the same. And I just think you got to believe that those teams are the ones that they're going to know how and when to turn it on when they need to, and that now they need to. when I was talking about this before the series got locked in, and the general feeling about Vancouver was pretty optimistic, but my feeling was like they just got to avoid St. Louis, because that's going to be a really tough, playoff proven team that they got to now match up against. I don't know if Vancouver's blue line is good enough to handle all of that. It remains to be seen how much offense they're going to be able to generate against that defense and the goaltending from Jordan Binnington. I have a harder time. This is crazy to say, maybe, but I have a harder time seeing a way Vancouver wins that series than Montreal beats Philadelphia. Is that crazy to think?
Well, Philly's still. I mean, you're wrapping yourself in if you're Montreal is Philly's an out of the blue team that. Yep. For whatever it's worth. I mean, they do have experience with the Voraceks and Giroux's, obviously, but they're still kind of on balance, a youngish team and untested in the playoffs.
Yeah. And again, and if you're a Canucks fan, I think you can swallow that. Like if you,
if the Canucks lose, if they show well and lose in 6, you are ear to ear.
Absolutely. And because this year was all about getting to that next step, taking another step. The goal was really get to the playoffs and try and win a game or two. And so they've achieved that. And now you're playing against the defending Stanley Cup champions. So go out, show well, and come back next year stronger.
Go out, show well. That is exactly how we approach things on Tape to Tape. Hopefully we show well with our cup picks. We both have Tampa. This might be the first time we're both aligned, unless you had Tampa last year. I'm not sure. Anyways, we'll see what that does for the Bolts. Tampa over Vegas, but as always, giant shoulder shrug in there. Who knows? Make sure you're checking out everything on sportsnet.ca as we roll through the 2020 Stanley Cup playoffs. All kinds of stuff from Rory up there. Thanks to our guys behind the mics. I finally just came up with that. Michael Myers and Mike Tassoni are behind the scenes guys, the video and audio production of this podcast. We'll be back, of course, next week. So check back then for more glass rattling hockey action on Tape to Tape.